Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our webinar today, which is called Recruiting for Diversity. So this is a collaborative webinar. It's been organised by, so it's fronted by Women in Identity, but we've done it in collaboration with DIACC, Women in Security and Privacy, and also ID Pro. The reason why this webinar came about is because our four organisations got together over the last sort of 12 months on a number of calls to talk about the things that we collaboratively could do together within our industry to try and promote more diverse workforce, to support more people from diverse backgrounds getting into the areas of identity, security and privacy. And it's a really challenging topic. And the reason why we've landed on the webinar today is because we like to do things that are pragmatic and practical. So we've got some really amazing speakers for you who are going to talk to you about the ways in which they think about diversity and how they actually enable that within the recruiting field. So I'm hoping that I certainly have, I get approached by a lot of people who ask me, how can they get a more diverse representation within the candidates that are coming through their pipelines? So I really hope that you're going to find out some interesting things today and some things that you will be able to take away practically from today and go and deliver within your workplaces. So in terms of housekeeping, if you can stay on mute, that would be really helpful to make sure that we kind of keep the background noise to the minimum. If you've got a question, please just raise your hands and we can make sure that you get your question heard. Before you ask your question, please identify yourself to others so we can introduce you. Just to let you know, all of our webinars are recorded and we put those on our YouTube channel. So it will be recorded today. We're also going to have a workshop after the session today. So we're going to be having our presenters and then we'll be having a workshop. You'll be automatically, so you don't need to do anything with your Zoom settings at all. You'll be automatically put into your Zoom rooms with your different collaborators. So don't do anything at that point. We'll just automatically, Caitlin, who's in the background, will do the magic. And what we'd like to do right now is take a screen grab for our social media, just to show some of the people that we've got in the room. If you would prefer not to be visible, please switch off your camera right now. I'm just going to give people a second to do that. And then I'm just going to ask Caitlin if she can take that screen grab, who's doing the magic in the background, so that we can use some of those screen grabs for social media.
And Emma, if you actually wouldn't mind just stopping sharing your screen for a moment so I can get everybody. I did not think of that. All right.
You got it?
All right. Oh, and all on one page so far. Cool. All right. Everybody ready? 3, 2, 1. Fabulous. Everyone looks great. Oh, I got a couple more. All right, I'm doing one more. 3, 2, 1. Thanks, everyone.
Cool. Okay, I'm just going to share my screen again. Okay, can you see my slides again?
We've got your presenter view that we're seeing.
Switch my views.
Perfect.
Okay, cool. Can you still hear me and everything okay? Yeah, perfect. Right, cool. So just a bit about Women in Identity. So my name is Emma Lindley. I'm one of the co-founders of Women in Identity. So I've actually been involved in the organisation 4 years, but we have been formally registered for just 2 years. We are a non-profit. We're led and organised almost entirely by volunteers. We have actually recently hired a couple of people, and we have, and somebody described it to me the other day, that Women in Identity has gone gangbusters, was the actual words that they use. We have just in the 2 years that we've been established, we already have 2,000 members across the world. We have 15 ambassadors located in lots of different countries globally. And across social media, we have nearly 6,000 followers and growing. So this just shows you the interest in the topic and the need for diversity within our space. So why Women in Identity? Well, why do we exist? It's to inspire, elevate and support a more diverse workforce in the identity industry. So this topic that we've picked today with our collaborators with DIACC and ID Pro and Women in Security and Privacy, this is absolutely within our wheelhouse. And our vision is that identity solutions intended for everyone should be designed by everybody. And you know, the issues around the lack of representation of a diverse workforce within our industry potentially has areas and risks of bias. But what we want to do is make sure that we have a more diverse workforce so that the solutions and the people that are building those solutions actually represent the people that they're building them for. If you want to follow us on social media, here are the hashtags, and we will have a number of people tweeting on those hashtags today. So if you've got your Twitter open or your LinkedIn open or whatever social media or Instagram open, feel free to use these hashtags and we'll be able to retweet your content that you have today. And if you want to join us, you can join. It's completely free to join Women in Identity. Just go to www.womeninidentity.org. and you'll be able to become a member there. And lastly, I just want to thank all of our sponsors today, because without them, we wouldn't be able to function as an organisation. So I want to thank all of our silver, gold and our platinum sponsors for all of their support for Women in Identity. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to hand over to Rosemary. Rosemary is one of our, is actually on our board of advisors for Women in Identity. And I'm going to let Rosemary introduce you to our amazing speakers today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Emma, and hope you are successful in your next tag team event. Thank you for introducing us and the session. So thank you very much, everyone. My name is Rosemary Wilson. Good evening, good morning, wherever you are in the world. Good night, even if there's some of you here. So I will be introducing next up our speaker, Sebastian Manhart, who is also in a tag team. He has to rush off, so I won't speak for too long. I'll allow him to introduce himself shortly because he does have something very important that he needs to do. So I have it as Sebastian is an advisor to the German Chancellery and ID 2020, but I will allow Sebastian to tell you more about himself and what's going on for him, and he will be sharing some of his experience around masked recruitment for Simprint. So over to you, Sebastian. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, and a real pleasure to be here today to talk about a topic that I'm very passionate about, and I don't get to share my experiences on this as often as I hope. But maybe let me start with who I am. My name is Sebastian, and I've worked in digital identity for around 7 years. I now work as an advisor to the German Federal Chancellery on digital ID, to ID 2020, the World Bank. But before that, I was an identity entrepreneur. I actually helped set up and scale Simprint. I'm one of the few non-profit biometrics companies that are out there. And I was CEO there, Chief Operating Officer, for a number of years. And that's where I gathered, I think, my initial and most of my experiences hiring that have shaped how I go about it today. And maybe to dive straight into it, so I'm going to talk about mass recruitment and what this can mean for an organization, especially a digital identity organization that is trying to improve its diversity. But how I came to this, we didn't do this from the start. We actually had pretty conventional hiring processes, and maybe starting with what the wake-up moments for me, were when, well, you sit in front of a pile of 200 CVs and you're asked to go, you have around an hour and a half or 2 hours to go through them, and you do it because you have to, and then afterwards you just feel absolutely crap about it because you've caught yourself doing all the things that you really shouldn't do in hiring, right? Like you just jump to, okay, what's the university? What's the previous company? Do I recognize any of it? And then I'm not even talking about all the unconscious bias that happens probably from the names that I see on that CV, potentially pictures put on there, all of that. So I felt pretty bad about that, but I still kind of just did it for a number of years because that's just how we thought hiring had to be done. And again, we were a group of students that just set up a company. And so we didn't really have much reference beyond sort of best practices that we read from books. And then even worse, I would say, from my personal experience, were the interviews. I hate doing interviews. I've hated it because it's just bias in your face, right? Like it's something that when you sit in an interview, you just, there's so many things that have to come together for the person to actually do well and to impress you, and it has nothing to do with how well they can do the job. Sometimes it does, but most of the time, really, it doesn't. And I did so many interviews. We were growing fast. You know, we started as 5 people. When I left, we were around 50. Obviously, many people come and went. So we hired probably around, I don't know, 80, 90 people while I was there. I was involved in most of these processes. And it was just, yeah, the interviews were probably the worst bit of it. And especially the more senior the roles, the more late stage in the process, the more excruciating and long the interviews would be. And on top of that, because we were a global company, we were hiring all over the place. We were hiring in Ethiopia, we were hiring in Bangladesh. And I could just see how, for example, cultural differences did not translate well into interview settings, right? Because we just have preconceived notions of how someone has to perform in an interview based on our own experiences and where we grew up. And so the whole interview process was just nuts, in my view. But again, we did it for a few years, and we ended up with a company that looked very much like ourselves. And I think the moment came 2 or 3 years in. I remember we had an offsite, and we looked around and we were like, you know, we're a company operating in, it was like 10 countries at the time. Our team is not diverse at all. Why is that? And we started to just start to investigate a bit more, and hiring was really one of there's obviously company culture. There are many things that might push people out of a company and reduce diversity, but the main lever that we saw was around increasing the diversity in the funnel and in the hiring itself. And at that point, we stumbled upon the concept of mass. It's also called blind recruitment in many contexts, by the way, but it might be offensive to some. So mass recruitment is more appropriate. But we stumbled upon the concept of mass recruitment, and it just seemed to make so much sense. And maybe I should quickly explain. Many of you will know already, but mass recruitment essentially means that you try to remove, not all, because that's impossible, but a lot of the sources of bias that infiltrate any recruitment process by removing all things such as, you know, in the basic details that influence your decision making as a hiring manager: name, gender, age, universities, previous employers. And you try to really focus on what are the tasks, what are the skills a person needs to perform at the job, design a hiring process to test the skills, not the personality, not whether we like them, not whether they are cultural fit, which is one of the worst words in hiring, because that's basically just a glorified way of saying, you know, bias. But how do we remove all these things and really focus on the essentials? And it's terrifying, right? Because we implemented it, we sort of, first we did it just for the first stage. So we got rid of CV screening. We did a blind hiring first stage or mass hiring first stage, and then we still had interviews after. Then we went a stage further, and we gradually moved more and more away. And the last people I hired at Simprins, I hired 5 people in one batch. It was quite a funny experience because by the time I made them the offer, it was the first time I actually read their name and saw their face. So I hopped on a call with them and I was like, congratulations, you got the job. And they were shocked. They were just like, what do you mean? I'd explained it before in email that this is how the process works, but they were still shocked. They were like, we've never spoken. And I told them, yeah, that's fine, but you're hired. If you want the job, feel free to ask me questions, but you know, you're good to do the job. And I hired 5 people this way. And as a hiring manager, it was terrifying because, you know, you feel that you're giving up so much control, and you kind of have to trust in the process. You have to trust in the science behind it, into all the research that has been done into it. And I couldn't have been happier with those people. And they were, you know, just to give you an idea, afterwards, I looked at the CVs. I looked at all the we had like 150 applications, and I was just curious. I was curious, like, who did we reject? And there were people, often white males like myself, with some of them 20, 25 years of experience, that in a CV screening would have been top of the pile. They got knocked out first stage, right? And then we had probably the most impressive person, I think, in this context was, we were looking for a fairly senior person. We hired a 23-year-old. Like most people we hired here were 30, 35. But we hired one person who was a 23-year-old. When I hopped on the call with him, I was shocked. I was like, oh my God, this is the person who I'm making an offer to, because all my bias got triggered in that moment. I just saw this really young Indian in front of me, and I was like, how? But this is the point, right? He was fantastic. And he's been with the company. I've left the company a couple of months ago, but he's been with the company for over a year. and he's doing tremendous. He's one of the most high potential young professionals I've ever seen. But he would never, ever have made it through a CV screening process. I also had feedback from people who got rejected. I never had so many people write to me after rejection with paraphrasing, this was the most worthwhile recruitment process I ever participated in. And I can really see how fair it was, transparent. And it actually really helped the reputation of our company, because as a company, even if people get rejected, they see that they got rejected out of meritocratic reasons, and that your company has integrity and puts fairness and transparency into things like a hiring process. By the way, if you're interested in the nuts and bolts, I've actually written a Medium post which goes literally through like step by step how you can do it, but I won't bore you with that today. Like, feel free to go to it and also contact me if you want more details. Today, I really thought I'd give you more of an introduction to this. And when I left Simprance now, I now work as an advisor, as a consultant, and I'm recruiting junior consultants, and I've replicated the process for my own. And again, I've had amazing experiences. I've just hired 2 people with the same process. And again, the feedback, I sent a feedback also survey around afterwards. There was so much positive feedback. But now, shortcomings of this approach. It won't, if you actually, and this depends also on geography, if you're trying to do affirmative action, if you're actually trying to get specific profiles into the company, mass recruitment will not do that for you. You know, you might do mass recruitment and end up with more 5 white guys in your company, right? Like, this is a real challenge. You get more diverse people applying because people feel that it's more accessible, that it's fairer, that it's not, you know, giving preference to people with certain, for example, verbal skills. But it does still reside entirely on the quality of the funnel that you're targeting. And so it's very, very important that wherever you advertise the job before this process is already a diverse pool of candidates. Otherwise, you know, existing dynamics might be reflected in the people that you score hires in a masked process. So I just wanted to be clear that it can actually backfire from a diversity perspective, although you can still say it was incredibly fair, but it might not lead to the result that you would like it to lead to, right? So I personally had pretty good experiences because we've used a very diverse funnel, but this is, I would say, the biggest drawback. And the other thing is that you'd have to also make sure that you still follow whatever legal process is in place in your country. For example, we still had to collect CVs. That was a legal requirement that we had to collect CVs for I never saw them, and we made it very clear to the candidate that it's only collected for administrative purposes, but you have to make sure that you still follow due process. But yeah, other than that, big advocate. By the way, one thing I didn't mention, I looked at it, it saved me around 70 to 80% time in recruitment. So it's also incredibly fast compared to conventional face-to-face scheduling, interviews, all of that jazz. But it's definitely something I recommend you try, and then you see how it goes. But yeah, if you have any questions, happy to answer them. And I hope this gave you a quick intro into mass recruitment and why I think it's a good way forward.
Thank you very much, Sebastian. That was brilliant. I love your honesty there. I absolutely love you saying what you would have normally done and what you ended up doing for this process and the way you pulled it together. I'm just going to give the audience a couple of minutes if you want to pop any questions in for Sebastian, because you have to leave shortly. What, 5 minutes?
Around 10 minutes max.
10 minutes. Okay. So if anyone has any specific questions for Sebastian on this process, it would be great if we can hear them, and so that we've got an expert here. You know, he's done it once. I class it. At least once. I class him as an expert. So we have one question for you, Sebastian. How can we persuade identity leaders to take this approach?
I mean, at different levels, if you are in a position to hire, I think we should lead by example and just do it and convince people in your organization about this, so that you start within your organization. And then I think we need to talk about it. There's still surprisingly little written. That's why I also wrote a blog post and tried to advertise it a lot, because I just wanted to increase the awareness for this. And I think the awareness for mass recruitment, most people I speak to, even seasoned leaders of identity companies, have never heard about this. And they get quite intrigued, but also frankly, most people, especially executives in my experience, have an aversion to this because people hate to lose control. And it feels like you're losing control. So I think it's an advocacy effort. We need to do it and at the same time talk about it and really push it so that people become aware of it. And the question at some point becomes, why are you not doing it? Whereas at the moment, it's a huge asset if you do it because people are not used to it, but it should be the opposite.
Yeah, that's brilliant. We want other people to have this fear of missing out. So we want it to become more normalized rather than it being a one-off thing and you introducing it or people like you introducing it. So yeah, that's a really good response to that. What I really liked about what you also said about your honesty was you were rushing, and that's what most people do. They get so many CVs on their desk or wherever, and they rush it and they pick the easiest, they go for the easiest options, which I think a lot of people here can relate to. So, and also I think the commercial aspect, who are we going to make the most money out of, becomes a really prevalent thought process, which I think is important. So thank you very much for that. We've got quite a number of questions here, so I'm going to just pop through them. Another one for you. How has the new process improved diversity in the organisation? Well, you've moved on from that organisation, but perhaps you could speak to that for Simprints.
I think quite a lot. If I think about the company that I left versus the company that had that discussion at the offsite, massively. At the time, honestly, we were 12 people who were all between 25 and 32, Western educated, mostly white, mostly male. And by the time I left, we had a really broad range of age, background, geography, experiences. Also people who, for example, haven't studied, right? Like who would never pass or get into a tech company in a traditional way. So in my view, there was still a lot of room for growth, especially in the technical team, just recruiting women, for example. You notice it was incredibly difficult to find, to increase the funnel sufficiently, especially in the technical teams, to have more female engineers. But overall, it did a significant positive dent on the company.
Yeah, so the action really made a significant improvement to your hiring process and the diversity in the organization, which is what we're trying to promote and achieve. So thank you. That's great. Lovely to see that as a working example. So I have another question here for you. Don't want to miss out on how did you test skills without revealing identities?
This is absolutely crucial, and I post on my blog as well, and I write more about that there. But you really have to define upfront, which again is helpful for a hiring manager. You have to define upfront what are the essential skills, right? Because very often we just put a standard JD up there, job description, and then we just go ahead and we look for cultural fit, and that's how you end up with the wrong hire. So really figuring out first what are the key skills that you need for a given role, and then you define an initial hiring step. For an engineer, it might be a coding challenge. For a non-engineer, it might be a written questions and answers in a certain space limit, that really test that skill, where you ask specific examples for a given skill or how people would deal with a given situation. And then you have to score according to that skill matrix that you defined up front. And various people score it independently of each other without knowing each other's answers. And then you aggregate it and you literally pass to the next round the people with the highest scores. Yeah, that's how you do it.
That's so brilliant. It's just total anonymity. So it really does, you have the outline for the skills test, and that's how you process it. And that is fairness in itself. So if the person is not qualified to be there in the selection process, then that speaks volumes. Wonderful. Thank you very much. Got some really, really wonderful questions here. I will continue with that until you need to leave us. And this next question is, what was your existing team's responses or attitude to this approach? Really interesting.
Varying. I would say hiring managers were a bit freaked out, and we didn't prescribe it. So we told the team basically this is a best practice, but every hiring manager had the independence to do it the way they wanted. I went all in. I went all the way with this. We kind of instituted it. You have to do it you have to skip the CV screen. Like that's one thing that we said, okay, everyone has to do that. But some people kept interviews. And because I think that's the biggest thing that I noticed is despite the evidence, despite the research, some people just don't want to let go of an interview. I struggle with that. And whenever I was called into one of those interviews, I was very open about my feelings beforehand. But that's the biggest challenge I saw. Most people who were not hiring men, they loved it, right? Because they saw the results. They saw great people with a lot of diversity coming into the company who brought healthy conflict, who brought different perspectives. So everyone but hiring managers loved it. Hiring managers, it depended a lot on sort of their, how open they were towards this.
Healthy conflict. Love it. That's not a phrase I hear often. Wonderful. It's needed. Healthy conflict. Conflict is a part of life. So being able to pass through that and find solutions is absolutely brilliant. You can definitely be a spokesperson for lots of organizations for this space, not just identity, but just around the globe in different industries. So brilliant responses. Next question. Why is it faster? Fast and better seems like a dream. Do you understand that question?
Yeah, I mean, it is a dream. The basic premise is you can do it asynchronously. That's the first thing I would say. So every reviewer works at their own time whenever it suits them. That's the opposite of having to find time in 3-person schedules to organize an interview, right? So the first thing is, I think, the asynchronous nature of the hiring process. The second thing is you review written responses mostly, or written challenges, or written proposals, whatever it is that you're hiring, which is so much faster and more targeted than 1-hour interviews or 1.5-hour interviews. And so overall, when you add that up, especially if you're getting a lot of applicants, it's just so much faster. So yeah, it's faster and you can work at it whenever you want, which is again something that I very much appreciate, given we are living in a remote working world. But yeah, on that note, I'll have to run. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, Twitter, whatever medium you use. Feel free to check out the Medium post. If you have any more questions, or you want even some of the nuts and bolts, some templates, whatever, just get in touch with me. I am very happy to support anyone who wants to promote mass hiring, because it's something that we need more in our industry, but also I think in general. So anything I can do to support you with this, just get in touch. And thank you again for the opportunity today to talk about it. Really enjoy always sharing my experiences with this.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sebastian. I know you have to run. There are piles of questions there, quite rightly so. I can imagine. I have a few as well. I was trying to hang on to every single word you said, but I was also trying to write. But I would love to read that blog post as well. So thank you very much. I'll let you go. I don't want you to be late. And we'll be in touch with the questions. Thank you. Have a good evening. Bye.
Bye.
So thank you, everyone, for popping your questions in there. Sorry, Sebastian has to go, so afraid we can't answer them from his point of view. But if we can, we will pass on these questions to him and get his responses from them. We'll know where, because I can see so many questions there, so we'll know where to the questions that he didn't respond to. But I picked up so many things from that conversation around what he said around rushing, not being a priority, just the homogenous background, recruiting people that look like you, that are educated in similar spaces to you. And this happens again and quite often in this space. This is something that's happening quite often. And talking about it, we talk about D&I a lot. We talk, but not many people are really honing in on taking the action that really can make a difference. And one of the discussions I was having around this was about people self-selecting for applying for companies because they feel they will never ever get in, because that's not a company I think will want me to work for them. They won't allow me, they won't bother, they'll see my name, they'll interview me, they'll say no. And so many people self-select and don't really go for the roles that they want to. So I think that's really great that Sebastian was so honest about his experiences and the differences he made, and forever he will have changed people's lives going on, moving forward with what he's done and what the organization has done. So that's really brilliant. I don't know if you, Karen, you had some, I know you had a couple of questions or comments on this as well, around what Sebastian was saying.
No, I think what I was particularly interested in is the sense that you have to go really broad at the start of the process, because otherwise you actually create a narrow field, you know, in terms of where you advertise your job. So I'm interested in picking up the conversation with Sebastian about how he managed to make sure he was actually advertising the roles in a really broad spectrum of media that would appeal to a very, very diverse range. Because I can imagine that in itself is a challenge, because if you only advertise in certain media, you're already narrowing the field. And I think he alluded to that, but that's one to pick up again.
Yeah. Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, that's a really great point as well. And I also think that, yeah, the recruitment agencies, wherever whatever that looks like, if you've got an in-house, you have a bit more control on the types of people you're getting into the door. But if you're going to recruitment agencies, you know, it is a commercial aspect for them. So D&I is not necessarily going to be at the top of what they're looking at. I think many more companies, especially in the tech space, are talking about it and doing more. But I think we've still got such a long way to go with introducing more of what we can do to make this much more effective and inclusive for all types of diverse people from diverse backgrounds. I love the way that Sebastian said about the 23-year-old, from a very different background to him, got that role and is thriving in that position. That's wonderful. I love that.
Can I just jump in and ask if anybody else in the group, has anybody else had experience of running a masked or blind process that they want to share? Anything? Perhaps we can pick it up in the breakouts later.
Yeah, maybe people be a bit more, when they're smaller groups, they might be a bit more comfortable speaking about their own experiences as well. So we've got a few more minutes and we're going to ask Carrie Mayfield to step up. But just to continue on wrapping up some of what Sebastian said, him giving his own experiences, and, he would have gone for a white man similar to him or similar to his background. Is so honest, and we all do it. We all do it. We do it. We connect to people because of where they've come from. But he had his wake up moment when he realized that wasn't the way forward. And I love that the way they did that without removing everything from the university, the previous companies, even names. And I love when he said about interviewing people around the globe from Ethiopia and I can't remember wherever he said. And culturally, the interview process is completely different, and you can't expect people to interview the way you do every day. So that's quite important as well to remember that, and pull it back when it comes to this biases that we hold. So even in these basic conversations, we can really get to that point where we can recognize how biased we are. And we all do it. Every single one of us does it every day. But it's where you take those thoughts and what you do with those thoughts, those biased thoughts, is really, really important as well. So I've got, so we've got Francesca here. She says she's implemented a first round nameless CV screening, but it's clear from Sebastian's talk that there's so much more we can do. Yeah, just building on it. And I think even one step at a time is great, especially if you're fearful of the process, or your organization is fearful of the process, your teams, your leadership teams are fearful of the process. Just one step at a time, trialing it and seeing the effectiveness of it gives you some confidence in moving forward with doing more around that. So that was really good. I could have listened to Sebastian for a while. So that was really interesting. But we've also got Carrie Mayfield coming up, who's going to be sharing her experiences around, she's head of DE&I at Ping, and I think she's recently joined Ping, so we'll be hearing a little bit more. So from perhaps a different perspective, Carrie will be speaking to us about her thoughts and on the learnings that the identity sector can take from other industries. So Carrie brings with her a wealth of experience from other industries, so that will be really fascinating to hear what some of the differences and again the more challenging thought process from Carrie. So if you're up, Carrie, if you're ready.
Hi. Yes.
It would
Thank
be
you,
wonderful to
Rosemary.
hear.
Thank you.
And I'll let you introduce yourself and your wonderful background.
Wonderful. Thank you. And can I just do a quick time check? Because I want to make sure we have time to get to the breakout session. So how many minutes do I have? I'll try.
So you've got just over 20 minutes. So that includes the Q&A. So I'm sure people will have questions for you. So is that okay for you and what you've got?
Yes, yes.
Wonderful.
Sounds good. Thank you. All right.
Perfect.
So I actually have some slides. And I am looking at this from a different perspective. Okay. All right. All right. So thank you for having me. Let me click ahead here. There we go. There. So let me just introduce myself for a moment. Carrie Bayfield, I have recently joined Ping Identity as the head of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Prior to Ping, I worked for Mercer, Marsh & McLennan Companies, which you may be familiar with. It's a health benefits company. I was there for 8 years in a diversity leadership role. And then prior to that with Discover Financial Services in a diversity role there as well. Really excited to be here today. My remit as I've joined Ping is from a very high level overarching perspective. The company has already been on a diversity journey for several years, like so many different companies. This year, though, it's really with focused intention. And so what I'm doing within the company is helping, identify key metrics that we want to measure over time. And to make sure that our diversity efforts are actually working. I'll be creating a roadmap for the company, which will include actions such as learning and resources and tools for leaders and managers and colleagues on how to be more inclusive on teams, with each other. How do we create a place of belonging? And I'll speak a little bit more about that as well. And obviously recruiting is a really, really critical part of this overall process. So really what I wanted this is my diversity profile. Just wanted to share this to give you a little bit more about myself in a very short amount of time. And what I say is, like, you look at me and I look like a, upper middle class female, white female. But what I like to share that's part of my diversity story is that I am married to somebody who is Black. I have 2 sons who are mixed race. So I have had experiences over the years that frankly I wouldn't have had I just, just been myself and single. I like to say I'm a Generation Xer, but I'm a lifelong learner. I am really excited about learning about new industries, new topics, new projects. That's just who I am, and that's what makes work interesting for me. So this is just a little bit about myself. As I said, I like to share with others. It gives others a little more insight into myself, and it helps others see maybe we have some similarities together, or some differences. And it's a nice way of being able to provide a little opportunity to open up the window and provide an opportunity to dialogue and learn more about each other. So with that, I'm going to talk about, before I get started and talking about the recruiting aspect, I just wanted to talk about, like, what do we mean when we say DE&I? It's really important that we all have that same understanding of what these definitions mean. That's what I'm doing within the company right now, is communicating these terms, the definitions, to make sure we all fully understand what they mean. So we know that to realize the power of diversity requires a commitment of its 2 complements, equity and inclusion. And so with diversity, it's really about getting the mix of different people in the door. Inclusion is about ensuring that the mix is working really well together. And equity it's fulfilling the promise that we have equal access, opportunity, support, and rewards. We're ultimately working to create a place of belonging for all employees, where we can fully leverage the full potential of every employee, where innovation thrives, where, views and beliefs and values are integrated in the work that we do on a daily basis. So now we're gonna talk a little bit about, and like I said, I'm thinking about this very broadly. And so listening to Sebastian and what he is doing, what he was doing specifically around kind of the mass recruiting was highly informative, and I'd like to learn more about that myself. What I'm talking about here are really from the highest level, when you're putting together a diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy broadly, recruiting is a really important aspect to it. In talent acquisition, usually an individual's first encounter is with the company. And so it's really critical that our diversity efforts are strong and robust. So, when you look at talent acquisition analytics, it enables you to quickly identify the roadmap, the roadblocks in attracting and hiring diverse candidates. And it allows you to develop a fact-based strategy to eliminate bias and improve diversity in your hiring funnel. So it's really, what I'm really speaking to here around it's the importance of the diversity analytics, and then how do we approach that? Some key ways to approach that. So what do we mean? Diversity recruiting means being more thoughtful in granting everyone equal access to employment opportunities, and also opening your doors to a wider range of talent that may be just the very thing you need to succeed basically in this really volatile business climate that we have today. I could show you a whole bunch of stats on, the importance and the business case around, diversity increases innovation and business success. Diversity outperforms other companies, it increases profitabilities, etc. But I don't think I need to go there, because I think everybody on this call is fully aware of the importance of diversity, within the business, and it's a business imperative. It's really about that data-driven recruitment and the difference between making decisions on just a gut feeling and making them fact-based. It's a difference between making a successful impact on the business outcomes and also to failing to move the needle in diversity. So I'm going to go through five ideas to improve your diversity recruiting efforts. And it's really from the beginning to the end. Using a data-driven approach to recruiting creates a more diverse and engaged workforce. The 5 areas of analytics can help strengthen your diversity recruiting, which can also be applied towards other recruiting priorities, beyond diversity and inclusion. So number 1, examine your current employee population. While it could be tempting to go after all types of people and hope that something sticks, the reality is that different types of people will require different marketing programs to attract them to you as an employer. Some initiatives might be more expensive than others, but this is why it's really important to take a scientific approach to building the right strategy for your talent acquisition efforts. So the first step to think about is to identify where your diversity gaps are, using analytics to look at your current employee population and examine the head count by gender, race, veteran status, just for example. By doing this process, it's going to reveal insights such as whether your organization needs more minority races in executive leadership, or maybe more women in STEM roles. So once you know really where you stand with the diversity within your company, you can work with your business leaders to determine which diversity goals are more important. What are the high priority goals? And then allocate, the budget accordingly towards the initiatives that you really need to focus on. So the second one here is around, get more diversity into your hiring funnel. So, when hiring managers are pressuring your recruiters to hire critical positions as quickly as possible, it can be really easy to forget about adding diversity to your funnel. A data-driven recruiter, a recruiter that has access to this data, continuously monitors that funnel to see whether the diversity increases or decreases as the candidates move through the pipeline. So use the analytics to keep track of the diversity ratios, for example, around gender or ethnicity or veteran status, like I mentioned. In aggregate for every stage in the funnel, this is going to make it clear where in your hiring process you lose diverse talent. So really dig into that sourcing data to find out, where your most diverse candidates, where your most diverse candidate pools are, and then double down on recruiting from those sources. And you should always remember internal candidates as well. That's another source as well. So 3, better match your interviewers to candidates. That's another way that you should be looking at. Our research shows that there's reduced bias when the diversity of a job interviewer is matched to the candidate. There in 2020, their diversity best practices did a survey, and in that survey, it revealed that 98% of the organizations surveyed, 75% require the panel of interviewers to be diverse. So, really understanding your analytics to monitor how you're matching gender or ethnicity, for example, to the interviewer, to a candidate has a really important impact on your hiring process. Are more or less or the same number of diverse candidates moving through the funnel? Make adjustments as you need to. So the 4th point I wanted to just speak to was, go beyond homogeneous diversity numbers. So it's not just enough to say diversity went up by 10%. When improving workforce diversity, it's one of your business objectives. It's essential to keep track of hiring success rates by diversity group. So for example, if the goal was to hire more veterans, you need to be able to show how many were successfully hired, and your analytics easily separates your diverse candidates by group and shows how successful you were in each category. So the people analytics gets easier to be able to review them for your HR team, and to be able to better understand how different calculations are made, but it's also to be able to enable them to explain the reasoning behind the numbers to managers. Like you can, instead of managers saying, oh, recruiting is not getting me enough candidates, you have the data to show how many people actually went through that sourcing process. And how long that lengthy interview process resulted in candidate attrition. So it's a really great way for recruiters to be able to, leverage that data when they're working with their business leaders during the recruiting process. And then lastly, I was just going to speak to, keep track of your post-hire data. How your diverse hires fare long-term at your organization really reveals how important insights about your hiring practices, how long employees actually stay at the company, how they perform at the company, and how soon they receive promotions can tell you about the quality of your diverse hires and the experience that they're having within the company once they've been with the company. So if you have all of your pre-hire data and your post-hire data and systems, connected on one platform, of course, that's the most ideal. You can regularly analyze the performance of the diverse employees from, when they were hired to when they leave. And this really reveals the insights that help you identify, the best talent and the diverse employees and how they're moving within the organization. So use this information to help you recreate the steps that you took to actually hire them in the first place, so that then you can continually attract and hire diverse and high potential talent. So, I guess I just want to, kind of leave with, the key is not leaving aside your diversity policies or your diversity strategy. It's to make sure that this is actually embedded in your overall diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy in the decision-making processes. These five areas show that making people data really easy for your recruiters to find it and use it can create this positive change that we're looking for in organizations. From the beginning to the end, using this data-driven approach creates a more diverse hiring funnel, and then ultimately a much stronger, more diverse and inclusive workforce. So those are just a few of the ways that I would from the broadest perspective, we would, hope that our recruiting practices would increase and improve over time, and that we know that these, by taking these actions, they work, but it's really important for us to look at it broadly and work on it broadly. So, I would say start, kind of, if you have the opportunity and the luxury like I do, coming into an organization where we can step back and look at kind of our current state to be able to help us define where we want to go, it's ideal to do that. But if you already have, existing programming and processes in place, it's time to start to, look at those recruiting practices and see how we may be able to tie together the gathering of the data and how the analytics can help you, improve those recruiting practices on the front end. So with that, I'm going to pause and Rosemary, do you want to kind of, bring us back together, or do we just want to, start with a few questions? Either is fine. And I know that when we do the breakouts, it's going to be a great opportunity for you all to learn from each other on what's working within your organizations as it relates to recruiting as well.
Thank you very much, Carrie. We've got a few questions coming in already, but okay. Thank you very much for sharing DE&I from a data perspective. That's really good. And those 5 steps there will be really helpful for people here who want to start doing something different. Immediately, that's the whole point of this session, to be pragmatic and practical on going back into your organization, bringing ideas back for what you can do differently. So I'm going to go through some of the questions for you, Carrie. Is that okay for me to ask you?
And I'm trying to see if I can see the questions too. So
I'll take a load off. I'll read them for you.
Okay.
You can just relax and listen to me and respond to the questions. Save your energy for responding. Mm-hmm. So this is a good one from Francesca. So I will read it out. How do you collect data on demographics of applicants or even employee promotions at every stage to see where certain groups might be dropping off, particularly without making assumptions and whilst keeping demographic data anonymous? So I think that's a bit of a 2-part question as well.
Yeah, number one, we collect the data through our HRIS systems, and most companies already have these systems in place. So we look at the data on a monthly basis as it relates to, gender and race and ethnicity, the different constituency groups that we're monitoring. We monitor that monthly. Within our company, we're actually looking at a new application recruitment tool that we're looking to engage. That's actually going to tie together with our existing HR systems. I guess what I would say is it's really important to look at the life cycle, like the employee life cycle, because you do make assumptions when you just look at when people drop out at a certain point, or if they haven't been promoted at a certain point. You start to make assumptions, and our bias does come into play. And that's why it's really important to kind of look at that employee life cycle from start to finish and watch the movement, over, 2-3 year period to see kind of what that journey looks like. And I guess that's why I'm such an advocate for, looking at this broadly, because it's very difficult to make the best decisions and really understand the data if you're looking at it at individual points in time.
It's great. Thanks very much for that, Carrie. Yeah, I think that definitely answers Francesca's question, and there was someone who seconded that question as well. So we have another one. How do you or have you addressed resistance to implementing a strategy for diversity recruiting at your current or previous organizations?
Yeah. So the way that in my previous role, the way that we addressed resistance from leadership was really to come to them with the data, with this story. And so we actually spent a lot of time looking at the data. We had a tool that we used called the internal labor market analysis. And it showed the life cycle of employees, diverse employees within the company. And we, outlined the story of what it looked like for women, as well as underrepresented talent, which for our purposes, it was Black and Latino within the US. And we showed them kind of the journey that they had, the existing workforce had over the past 3 years, and what that movement looked like through the data, through the story. And that's where we actually got their buy-in. And that's why I'm such a strong proponent for the analytics, because if you don't have that, it's always about the bottom line. It's, of course it is. Of course it is. And that's what, the executive leadership team looks at on a daily basis. And the other thing I would say is embedding this data within the overall business people data that they look at regularly is also a really good way to be able to kind of highlight the individual stories of those constituency groups within your company. But it also kind of shows how it's compares to others within the organization. And so you really have to do that due diligence in data sharing with the executive leaders in advance. Otherwise, you are not going to get their buy-in, and you really need it to be able to help you, get that buy-in on the strategy and what are those key actions you're going to take to move the needle in a positive way as it relates to diversity within the company. So that's really the number one thing I would say to start with.
Yeah, thanks for that. Again, going from the data is fact. You can't really argue with the data. So when you get resistance, as you say, it just show the numbers, the bottom line.
And the other thing I will say is it's been helpful. We have so much more data over the years and research backing this work and backing why it's important to have really strong, broad strategies as it relates to D&I within the companies, because we've got the research, we have the data that shows it actually makes a difference. It actually creates, places of belonging where you're going to bring in new talent who will want to stay and, thrive and want to stay.
Yeah, that's the key, wanting to stay as well.
Right.
So we've got a few more questions here. How do you ensure it's not seen as a checkbox exercise with resistant leadership?
Yeah, you're right. Check the box exercise. Leadership accountability, that's key. I would say visible commitment and accountability by your executive leadership, senior leadership within the company, talking about this work, talking about the importance of it. But then also, it's not just a one-time showing, it's regular interactions in this work. So it's regular touch points. So for example, when you're reviewing your diversity data, you're reviewing it on a quarterly basis, 4 times a year. Then you're turning around and you're being as transparent as you can, sharing the progress that you're making with the colleagues within your company. That shows true commitment and dedication. And that helps it move beyond that check the box activity, because it's showing the progress. So you have to be really, leaders have to be willing to be transparent. And in this day and age, that's imperative, I think, for every company to kind of stand up and just that's who they are, and this is what they stand for, and this is what we're going to do here to make this a better, more inclusive place. So I think that's one way of helping it move beyond that check the box activity.
Thank you very much, Carrie. That's good, great responses, and honesty. Again, there's a theme through this. Honesty is needed. We got Sebastian being honest as well earlier on about what he wasn't doing, what they weren't doing, and you're being here saying, you know, we have to be honest, look at the data, look at the numbers, ask ourselves difficult questions. So there's a theme here, be honest. So there are a few more questions, but we will need to go into the breakout now, because I think people are quite keen to discuss some of the questions. So I am going to ask, I think, Karen, are you going to jump in now and help with the facilitators, facilitating the breakout? But thank you very much, Carrie. So please stay if you can, and maybe we can, I don't know, we can shoehorn some more questions in before you go and get your wisdom.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Of your wisdom. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much, Carrie. Caitlin, I think you're just going to put people into groups automatically. I know we've lost some people who had to drop off, but I think we'll have about 3 groups looking at the numbers, and we've got 3 questions for everybody to sort of collaboratively discuss together. So do you want to go ahead, Caitlin, and put us into our work groups?
Yep, working on that right now.
Okay, thanks everyone for sticking around and being here and listening to our 2 experts, Sebastian Manhart and Carrie Mayfield. And we will definitely be giving you some updates on some of these questions as well if you didn't get your question answered. So please stick around and we'll be going into the breakout room. Thank you. We're just here, we've got a few more minutes and we are going to ask you to share some of your learnings. So if you can within each group, for each facilitator or someone from each group, if I could just ask you to share how you got on with the questions, and you know, what you found and what was most helpful to you. Hi Colette, and what you can, sorry, spotlighted you there. Hey. So if I could ask for, I don't know who all the facilitators are. I should do, but I know you were one, Colette, and Joni, I think, was the other one, or Janelle. Yeah, so Colette, tell me some of your learnings. What did you find? What did you discuss?
So when talking, you know, we had a great discussion. It was great to kind of meet some new people as well. One of the things I missed about COVID is like meeting new people. So that's great. But I think, you know, when talking about specifically job postings, one of our key takeaways is making sure they're kind of written in a way that is inclusive and doesn't exclude people, and you know, and actually having maybe some leadership training on that. You know, if you're going to be writing up job descriptions, making sure you're doing them in the right way. And I think also making sure, you know, as candidates are going through the interview process, making sure that the interviewees are representative of the company to the candidates, so that they get an idea and maybe feel welcome. I think we also all acknowledge it's so easy to hire someone who, you know, has the same interest as you, is exactly like you, but we brought up that like healthy conflict again, and you know, so that was a key piece. I think one other piece that we talked about when working for organizations that are striving for diversity is there historically has been a bit of a lack of flexibility, especially for women, especially for mothers, who are trying to balance a bunch of things. And so one of the positives potentially of COVID is that there is that more flexibility, that more flexible working environment now. And, you know, everyone you talk to says productivity hasn't decreased, people working from home, and that's great. So at least maybe this was a test case for companies to be more flexible, more remote jobs, that extra, you know, bit of time with your families and with your other kind of activities and outside of work passions. So those are kind of the key things that we talked about. Just to summarize, I don't want to say them all, so other people have stuff to say too. So yeah.
Yeah, I imagine the same or similar things came out in each session. So yeah, great. Thank you, Colette. And next up, who is the other facilitator? My apologies, I can't remember who it was. I know Karen was one, obviously, but Karen Bright.
And I was one as well.
Kay,
Kay.
right. My apologies. Thank you, Kay. Could you share some of what you talked about and discussed?
Well, you know, we really, it was a great group, and we had the chance to also kind of share our own experiences. And so, you know, we all have had things happen in our own job searches, for example, and we talked about, you know, what are the barriers to trying to get diverse candidates was really the only question we got to. So, but a couple of things. One of the people, and she had to jump off the call, but talked about the fact that she really liked what she was doing, but realized that there was no promotional opportunities anymore. And so has really tried to look at pivoting in her career. And that's really what's brought her, I think, to the identity field also. So it was interesting to hear her talk about, was maybe not her first choice, but she was realizing in some ways she doesn't have a choice unless she's willing to stay in a lower level position for the rest of her career. So, you know, so we were being supportive of her and telling her identity is a great place to be. And then we also shared about the fact that for those of us who are mothers, one of the folks on the call talked about essentially in her hiring process, because she had children or whatever, they immediately treated her as though she didn't really have as much in common with everyone else, that somehow she wasn't going to be a good fit. I'm paraphrasing, so apologies if I'm not saying this exactly correctly, but essentially making a judgment about the fact that she was home with children, especially now during COVID, and somehow that was going to make her less like the rest of the group, and really holding that against her. And we talked about the difficulties. And one of the other members of our group is actually on the hiring team, and I think really came to listen to the session to get good ideas, because they're finding that they want to open that funnel so it's more inclusive, and they're really struggling to get people to even apply. And so we talked about, you know, some of the experiences that we just described that people had. How does that play into how you're advertising and what you're sort of saying, you know, that you want to look for? What are you willing to embrace? And just trying to make sure that you are being inclusive in a lot of ways that might seem subtle, but make a huge difference in whether people are even going to be interested. So anyway, we ended up doing a lot more personal sharing, I think, of some of our own experiences.
Yeah.
And we all really had a lot of things in common. And I have to say, I felt like we were all supporting each other in just that little bit of a session. But, you know, it's true. And I think that one of the ways we sort of ended it was, the good news is that people are interested in trying to make it better, you know, and we're all starting by doing things like this, a commitment to learning, and to trying to find new ways. And that's really the place where it has to start, right? And once we're open to that, and we continue to educate ourselves and our organizations, then the more likely that we're going to have success in really embracing that diversity.
Wonderful. Thanks very much, Kay. That's great. We've just got a minute left, so I am going to ask Karen. I know Karen's going to wrap up with the WID Women in Identity slides, but I think we've had a wonderful session. Thank you so much for sharing that. I don't want to keep people longer. I know dinners need to be eaten, breakfast, lunch. So
Rosemary, you went on mute.
Yeah, we'll summarize everything from Sebastian and Carrie as well. Thank you, Karen.
Cool. Yeah, so from our group, just very quickly, I think, you know, we very quickly got into recognizing that when you're hiring for skills, it's challenging, because often you have to look right back at the education of women in STEM subjects, girls at school, and it can be hard if you're going to follow the kind of route that Sebastian was advocating of actually just looking at skills alone, because quite often you don't have the diverse diverse population with the skills that you may want. And you know, we talked about the number of job vacancies that are available, but actually women aren't coming, particularly women aren't coming through for those. So but that's a big societal issue that we didn't try to solve in our half-hour breakout session. I think some of the takeouts that I noted were just look at diversifying the funnel and broadening it as far as you can. Look at the language you're using in your job adverts. I think somebody else has mentioned that. And look at the partners that you can work with. Carrie mentioned some of the organizations they're partnering with who can help point them to a more diverse range of candidates. When people are on board, and we started talking about the onboarding side of things, you know, having a buddy, a trusted buddy who looks like you, who has got similar perhaps experiences, or certainly can help you onboard comfortably. I know in the past I've had a buddy, but the buddy was given to me to help me understand the organization better, rather than to help me feel comfortable within the organization. So I think that was something that was quite useful. And then just understanding, you know, how to actually move forward with this. Look at the boards, look at how the board's made up, the kind of messaging that's coming out of there. Is it just lip service, or are there strategies being put in place? But actually, the one thing we can do is just keep the conversations going and make sure we're having conversations within our teams, within our groups. We can't do everything at once, but having some really small steps and small actions, like, you know, checking in how diverse the team is, asking each other, you know, what makes them, what makes each of us diverse and unique, just to understand more of the backgrounds that people have. I think just by having those conversations, you're already sort of establishing a culture there that can only be for good. I'm sure there was a lot more that we were talking about, but yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot. So when we go into these groups, and there's so much to discuss. So thank you very much for sharing, Colette, Kate, and Karen. And we are going to wrap up in a moment. I will hand back to Karen in a second. So just to summarize a little bit, you know, we heard from Sebastian earlier, and, you know, the honesty was a big thing that stood out for me. And Carrie talks about data and using data really as part of your DE&I strategy, and just really looking at the way you recruit and onboard people from diverse backgrounds is essential. But, you know, each of us have had one thing that stood out for us that we can go away and use in our organization. So please keep the conversation going. It's really important, and don't just let it be the one-off sessions that you go to. Really put it into practice. So thanks very much. That's my brief summary because of the time. And I'm going to hand over to, I think, Karen, you've got something to say around.
Just to wrap up, really. And thank you. Thank you very much. You stepped in relatively late on in the process. So grateful for your facilitation, and really, really brilliant job at bringing it all together and keeping the debate moving. Just to say to anybody who's not a member already, please do visit our website and sign up for Women in Identity. I think most people who are on the call still are Women in Identity, but if you haven't explored the website and all the things we do, go to womeninidentity.org and have a look around and sign up. We give monthly newsletters and lots more events and networking that you can be part of. The next Women in Identity event will be 9th of July. It's been organised by our Singapore team, and it's looking at how we narrow the gender divide at a leadership level. So it tones in very well with what we've been talking about today, because you got to lead from the top, you got to lead from the front, and if we can get more women into those positions, then it can only be for good. And I think it's absolutely fantastic that our colleagues and team members out in the Southeast Asia are running these kind of sessions as well, because, you know, culturally that's not always been the most comfortable discussions to have. So it's fantastic to see those discussions now happening there. And if you'd like to sign up, go to womeninidentity.org, and you'll find all the details there. You can sign up. It's another Zoom event, so no geographic boundaries. You might have to get up in the middle of the night, but hey, what woman hasn't done that at some point? And thank you all so much for attending today. It's been fantastic to have such a big group, and I wish you a very pleasant evening or day, or off to bed if you have got up in the middle of the night to participate. Bye, everybody.
Everyone, great to talk with you all.
Yeah.
Bye,
Oh, sorry.
everyone.
Let me
Thank
just
you.
say bye-bye. Thank you to Caitlin, though. She always stays in the
Oh,
background,
yeah.
and she
Caitlin.
is amazing, 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 amazing.
Bravo, Caitlin. Thank you.
Have a good day, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Take
Thank
care.
you.